Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Rose Mohannan, and it's Halloween week.
We're excited to dive back into our normal format of being together. So, I'm Jordan. I'm excited to be on today's episode with you again, diving back kind of like we did in season 6, where it's a little bit more of an interview format. So, this week we're going to be talking about feeding strategies that might scare you but actually work. So, these are outside the box, unconventional, spooky feeding strategies.
I think something that we've been talking a lot about inside Cattleman U just in general is like profitability and creativity. And it's so interesting because you and I had a conversation the other day just about like our childhood and like even creativity and like some of the just things that are innately like our parents and what was just ingrained in us. And creativity is definitely a John Rose thing. Like my dad has always been really an outside the box thinker. And so I think sometimes we do really creative things that I don't even see as creative because they're like just outside the bubble of normal or acceptable. And my dad is just like he bred this culture of really every day is an experiment, and so in the feeding strategies, like we have really tried it all. And so we're going to dive into that. But a story I want to tell is I remember when Wheat Montana, the contract came up for their bread 5 or 6 years ago. And my dad really tried to get that contract in order to feed the leftover bread to the cattle. So to give you guys an idea, we're 15 minutes from the headquarters of Wheat Montana Farms, and any like day old bread or ruined packaging. The hard part though is the bread comes packaged. So in a plastic bag with a like the little plastic tie. And so he was researching and talking to all these people about if there was a machine that unbagged the bread, because he said if I could figure out how to do that effectively, he even like was calculating like could he pay someone and their whole job be to untie the bread, which could you imagine that being your job? But he thought that that might be such an feed efficient like avenue that we did so much research, and he still probably talks about it, but just like utilizing, and that was really before like distilled grains came up and some things like that, but trying to utilize the resources, one, to avoid waste and to decrease cost. But I remember we spent a whole summer trying to figure out how we were going to debag the bread.
I love that. You kind of already dove into some of the common outside of the box feed additives or feed supplements, being one is distillers grain. Why is that a popular one that you hear about people using?
I think anytime it can be a byproduct of something, that's really where we see one, the benefit of rumen, right? Is being able to turn that into meat and into calories and into use. And so distiller grain for a long time, there wasn't really like it was a waste product that they were paying to have taken away. Instead, now people pay to utilize it, so that's kind of a win-win because it is an affordable feed stub, but also it helps the business, right, to
Mhm.
get rid of the grain. The thing about distillers, though, is it's only profitable if you're really close and it's a consistent supply. So it's not something that works for us in our background as well because we just don't really have a good like, there's a couple on Three Forks, but they're not producing enough to make it a consistent part of our ration, even for, like, a season,
Mhm.
and so you have to there are some more parameters when utilizing that type of feed stuff.
Yeah. What are some of the other common ones that you've seen in your area or other areas that you work with?
I think stubble, I don't know that we consider that to be creative, but I think that there's a lot of benefit, not only for the farmer, but for the livestock, especially this time of year, harvest season, putting animals out on stubble. I think that there's just so many benefits to that, and it's usually pretty affordable. We feed potatoes. So at our operation, we feed any seed potatoes that either are misshaped or have too many eyes. So they actually hand sort those, which is also kind of a crazy concept. But we feed any potatoes that cannot be sold as seed potatoes. I've seen people be able to feed candy, kind of any of those waste products. I know bread obviously is something that people can feed. And so there's a ton of different things. And I think as our research increases too, we will start utilizing like more avenues to really understand like how powerful the rumen really is.
Yeah, one of the kind of time bound to this episode being about Halloween week is pumpkins. After this season, there's a lot of pumpkins left on shelves, and those are a good byproduct that can be utilized in the cattle's ration.
I also think pumpkin fields.
Mhm.
If you have any early freezes and rot and things like that, and they don't actually pick them off the vine, I think there's a lot to be said to utilizing a pumpkin field as stubble.
Mhm. For our listeners that aren't familiar with farming, can you describe what you mean when you say stubble?
Yeah, stubble is what's left over after harvest. And so I think it really depends on the crop and the amount left and also the goal. So if you have corn and you're turning it into corn silage, a lot of times they chop the whole thing versus, whole corn. Like there's a bunch of different ways. And so it's whatever's left in the field that the cattle can come in. What they do is they kind of stir up the soil as well as eat the stubble. And then it helps to push the seeds for next year back deeper into the soil.
You mentioned this earlier at the top of the episode, but back in 2017, a report surfaced that feedlots were using rejected Skittles and other candy byproducts as a cheap energy source in the feedlots. This made national news because people were shocked that cattle could eat the sugary products and still be okay. How does that kind of show the creativity of our industry to a global scale?
I think it really how powerful the rumen is and just that maybe we haven't even tapped into all of the resources. But anytime there's food waste, and I know especially in the hog industry, which obviously we talk mostly cattle, but
Mhm.
hogs can consume almost anything really. And so one of our downfalls as human is a lot of waste. And so we mass produce most things
Mhm.
very happily. And so I think anytime that there is either like a recall on something or manufacturers error or anything that we can also utilize it, I think that's a huge win for the industry. And I think we need to be doing these studies and these deciding what works for feed subs and what doesn't because it's just going to be so important moving forward. Like we have a lot of mouths to feed.
Mhm.
And so how can we do that in the most user-friendly way? I also think sometimes though it sounds great to use a creative food sub, but you have to figure out like trucking and timing and consistency and all of that, especially when the end product's a steak. And
Mhm.
so if you're going to be producing steaks and burgers for people's plate, like we need to have some consistency in the ration.
Mhm.
So it's always worth like doing the math. Like even though it's cheaper, is it actually cheaper when you count your time, when you count all of that and figuring out like is that resource actually cheaper or is it just cheaper in the first check I write?
Yeah, kinda back to the bread thing. Was the bread gonna be a good option, but were you gonna have to create a whole other job of debagging it?
Yes. Which he wanted us to do that. We're not devaluing the bread.
What are some things that you would try if prices of your normal feed additives were rising and you had unlimited options?
We use a lot of straw, and I think that straw is always a really good option to utilize and to, test because it can take your really good hay and spread it out a little bit. The other thing too is I think when we look at this feed stuff, we have to think about like waste. And there's like a lot of different things. Can you add water to it to extend the feeding ability? All of that really should be conversations you're having with your nutritionist. But like, how can you take your resources now and utilize them in the best way possible?
Mhm,
I've always wanted to feed like saffron or sunflower or something like that, but
mhm,
that's just not what our neighbors raise and not what's available to us. So we do feed some corn silage, we feed some corn, feed some haylage, some potatoes, and some straws, the majority of our ration.
mhm. Well, now that we talked about the cattle ration stuff, we wanted to add a fun Halloween tying element into this with a game. Unfortunately, we don't have the Skittles, but we are going to use a random generator to pick the colors for the game that we're going to play. So, just some quick questions for you and I to answer for people to get to know us a little bit better.
This is my soda company, North Fork Fizz. This is a dirty soda that I made today. It is root beer shortbread with a shortbread whipped cream on top. Oh, and marshmallow fluff.
Mm.
It's very delicious.
So, for our first color is blue. These questions are kind of about everyday ranch life and ranch culture. So, what's your favorite part of a normal day on the ranch?
My favorite part of a normal day on the ranch, I think, depends on the season. One of the things that in the summer my dad loves to do is, like, right before we've turned the cows out, is go ride in the side by side or four wheeler and just, like, go look at all the mama cows and all their babies, and I really enjoy doing that at the ranch. We have the best sunrises and sunsets, and so he kind of loves that time. He gets his dogs out and they run with us, and I really like that in the winter or in the summer. In the winter, I think that probably morning is the best when everything's kind of like untouched from the night and everyone's waking up and you get out there and check all your the cattle and the calves especially. And just I'm a big like I like to spend time with people on the ranch and especially since I'm not there every single day, I really enjoy like spending dedicated time and looking at the genetics and the things we've been putting years and years into practice, so that's my favorite part. If you could invite 3 people alive or dead, could be anyone, to a branding pen conversation, who would they be?
Ooh, this is a tough question. Oh, I have no idea. There's so many different ways you could go with this because you could go with like people that could influence like the industry, either if that's like a political person or like a historical figure, or you could go with like people that you like your friends who like haven't got to go branding. Uh I'll go with mix. So I would want to invite my friend Jade. She's not a part of the cattle industry, but I think she'd really enjoy it. And I think we would have a lot of fun if she got to join like a branding, especially the way your family does it, where it's very much anybody gets to be involved and jump in and help. The next person I would invite, three people. This is so many people.
1 down, 2 to go.
I think it'd be funny to have like an Alexander Hamilton or like a George Washington there. I think it would be really funny for them to like experience. I would say George Washington because if you go to Mount Vernon, he really was like all about ag, and that was a huge part of like the way he constructed the building was to tell a story of like farmers and stuff. I don't know branding practices from the 1700s, so I think he would find it quite interesting what we're doing in today's world and how important it is still to a group of people, the ag industry. So I think he'd be a fun addition to the branding pen. And my last one, who I have no idea who my last one would be.
Maybe Jesus.
I don't think Jesus would want to come to the branding pen.
Okay, Paul or
Paul.
something.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next option. I've been reading Corinthians too, so that would actually be kind of fun, like Moses. Noah. I'm gonna invite Noah from Noah's Ark to the branding pen for my third person because he gets to see that cows lasted. I think it'd be so fun. After the flood, we really rebuilt the cattle herd.
Yeah, that's a crazy thought.
Yeah.
Because I wonder what the cows that got on the ark look like compared to today's cows.
I think he would love it. I'm taking Noah as my third person.
Perfect.
For your last questions, we're going to go with yellow. This is innovation in business. So, what business decision has had the biggest payoff on your operation or in your personal businesses?
One business decision?
And invite 3 people to branding, so
I think the business decision that had the biggest payoff was in 2019 or 2020 when we switched K-Rose company to a EOS model, which is the entrepreneurial operating system model, where it started to like define everyone's roles a little bit more and also give accountability. So I think as a boss and as a CEO and as a leader, sometimes it feels like it can all fall on you and you're accountable for every single thing, even if you've delegated it. And that can be really detrimental because some things you have control over, some things you don't. And people need to be able to own their tasks. And so when we switched to the US model, it really like allowed people to have accountability and also showed us like who was the right fit and who wasn't. And so it's been something we've implemented for 4 or 5 years that has been really helpful. And it wasn't like a super easy transition. But I have friends who run businesses who have also implemented it. And it just really helps like the hierarchy and people to know who their lead is and all of that. And so I think that's probably the biggest payoff decision I've made.
yeah, it's definitely makes it very clear when you work in the system, and I'm a goal-oriented person, and it's all goals, so that's very exciting and fun to see the company move together.
Yep. What made you fall in love with ranching in the first place?
That's a great question. I think, uh, ranching is something special, so I don't know if I necessarily would say I'm lucky, like, I am in love with ranching, but I don't get to do it yet, so I would say I'm gonna still fall in love with it when I have the chance to have my own cows, so I'm gonna say what made me passionate enough to go into ag and fully, I think, is what I wanna talk about more because my whole life I didn't know if I was gonna go into the industry, but then in, like, junior year of high school, which sounds so juvenile, but, like, I definitely had, like, a little mini life crisis, and I was like, "I don't actually wanna be a doctor, I don't wanna go and do that," and so to have that realization in high school and say, "I'm actually gonna commit to this crazy industry that always feels like it's trying new things and not necessarily stable, and that was gonna be what I was gonna go into and make my whole life revolve around, and I was lucky enough to find you who also is crazy enough to go full in on something that is kind of tumultuous and think outside of the box. I think just finding people like you and finding other leaders in the industry that are passionate as well, but show you that there is a way to do it and do it right has had a huge impact on how much I love cows and ranching and how it's such a big part of my life now.
And I think being a rancher was, like, not necessarily a career that I even thought was, like, an option.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because I was a woman or just
Yeah.
because I never thought my dad was a rancher, growing up, like, I knew we had cattle and I knew we
Mhm.
did ranching, but, like,
Yeah.
obviously labels and stuff, and so, it's so interesting because when we think of the agriculture industry, I thought I'd go into ag ed
Mhm.
because that felt like a very normal place, right?
Yeah.
Extension or in the classroom for a woman involved in the industry, and part of what we do at Cattleman U is, like, I hope that people know there is you wanna be a photographer, you can be an ag photographer, like, you wanna be there's so many options that all are in this,
Mhm.
and I think even you coming into the industry, like, making that realization
Mhm.
10 years after I had the realization that I wanted to be in agriculture, like, you already had so many more options, but still, like,
Mhm.
we could never have, even in your junior year, like,
Yeah.
realized that, like, this is a career in agriculture,
Mhm.
and you can kind of shape it however you want, and if you wanna be in agriculture, like, we want you to be here.
Yeah, and that's, like, the cool thing too is when we talk about our job, like, I was telling a new friend about my job, and she was like, "It's crazy, like, that's, like, so fun," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's so hard to explain, like, what our job really is and, like, what we get to do, and we're just so blessed that every day looks different and everything is tied to cows because cows are fun." So, that's how we make 100% of the money that supports multiple families in the company.
Yes, I always tell our employees, "Make sure you're eating beef." Days I give them a hard time about Thanksgiving and stuff, and I'm like, "Just remember, the reason there's ink on your paycheck is because of a cow somewhere.
Yeah.
Some portion of a cow
Yeah.
helped pay salaries of, between multiple businesses, 14 or 15 people." And so when you think about that, like, what a blessing, but also there's so much room to be creative in this industry that being an ag doesn't have to look like it used to.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanna come back, you can do it your own way and forge your own path.
Yep.
Since we are recording this on October 28th to go on our Halloween episode, we have a lot of stuff that we can talk about cattle market wise. There's been a lot of news and things that have come out in the last few weeks that have affected the cattle market. The most obvious one are the comments made by the White House in regards to importing more beef from Argentina. What are your thoughts? What have you been seeing on social media and in the sale barns you've been sitting in?
Yeah, so I haven't really commented on this yet, and I think part of the reason is I'm not shy to share my opinion, but I think the hardest part is it's such a reaction that's happening now. And so, like, let's back up a little bit. We have had the strongest cattle market. We are also in year 5, which from a cyclical market, I know everyone wants to, get after me and say this is not like it's ever been before. I understand that. But in year 5, year 6, year 4, like, we're at somewhere close to the peak. So, I knew that, we were having this exceptional cattle market and I knew it wasn't going to last. And I kept telling my dad, it feels like monopoly money. Like, we are selling 5, 6, $7 a pound. Like, it just wasn't, there was like some lack of being reasonable in what was happening. And what I was noticing is almost all of the value cattle like had gone off the market. So a calf would come in, say with not a broken leg, but a really bad bum leg, you would imagine would not be able to get to 17, 1,800 pounds. I'm thinking they're supposed to sell this calf for $1. They're starting the calf at $3. Like, we've just lost some of the value opportunities in the market. Don't hear me say that there's not room to be profitable. There's still room to be profitable. We've just lost some of those, like, the risk was high on some of those value cattle compared to what it was years ago. And so Donald Trump came out and made a statement about beef prices. And I think the ironic part is there obviously shows some disconnect. We have had some, disconnect always, but it's getting stronger, even with all the people trying to influence and update President Trump on what's happening. Like there's still some massive disconnect. So we talked about beef prices relating to the cattle market. In return, the solution is going to be to import beef. So that's kind of the synopsis, right? A few things that's really interesting is the cattle that are selling now and trading now won't hit the meat market realistically until April or later, right? So that's not necessarily what's affecting the grocery store prices. The other thing that I think is really frustrating for ranchers is the grocery store prices are not in our control. So the grocery store, the calf market can go like this, and the grocery store market goes like this.
Mhm.
And so, sure, we have seen ground beef go up. We've seen steaks go up. We have, especially in the retail store, heard some grumblings about higher prices. But the prices we're seeing in the grocery store were cattle purchased last fall.
Yeah.
And for a lot of those cattle, that might have been $1 less.
Mhm.
And so when he came out and stated that importing beef was the solution, we kind of had a fit on social media. I mean, this huge reaction and a couple things. We already import beef.
Mhm.
We already import beef in from multiple countries. Typically, when we import, we get some lean ground beef. They say in the Argentina, we're going to get some of those bigger cuts that they can break down into the food service industry. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if you put, you know, Argentinian beef next to US beef, the quality is going to be what the food service wants.
Mhm.
I also know that as the economy, as things get more expensive, we're going to see food service go down, right? Because people are going to be cooking more at home, going to less events. So that feels like a little bit of a disconnect. And I've said it before, but it's so hard to understand the truth. Like, I'm not in that room
Mhm.
with Donald Trump. Like, I'm not in there really, like, when he's on the phone ordering the beef, I'm not in on that conversation, right? But I think that what we have done to the industry is the facts have not changed. There's shortage of beef. We're not retaining heifers, and we are killing bigger carcasses than ever.
Mhm.
So the hard truth facts have not changed. What we're seeing on the board is a fear reaction. And that tells me that there is enough players in the board who actually don't have skin in the game,
Yeah.
and they are playing speculations.
Mhm.
And so they are buying puts and calls based on how they speculate. And so this is a fear based reaction on the board.
Mhm.
Now, the board has been down significant. I mean, it has tumbled out of bed. Now, is it going to continue? Are we going to be able to stop it? I think the phrase I kept using with my dad even before this happened is when this goes down, it's going to be freight train. Like, I don't know that you'll be able to get ahead of it
Mhm.
and really put a stop to it. Um, and so we have seen the board react.
Mhm.
We have seen some of the prices come back, some of the demand be a little harder to lock in a profit. You're going from the potential of three, four, $500 profit to 100. So we are getting it a little bit, back to where we were standardly. But I don't think that importing lean beef
Mhm.
should be the cause of the social media blow up that we saw,
Mhm.
because what we're naturally doing with the shortage is we're getting bigger carcasses. And when you get bigger carcasses, you get fattier ground beef. And so just naturally, we're going to need some of that lean ground beef to come in.
Mhm.
And so I think it could be a good thing. Now, if we see the Mexican border open
Mhm.
and they allow 1 million Mexican cattle to come in a market, that truly is gonna change the, fundamentals.
Mhm.
But a few things that maybe we just haven't thought of, and I think this is also the same conversation with labeling of the beef. If the Mexican cattle come in, and rumor has it they're gonna be fat cattle, so they have fat cattle waiting to come in and hit our processors, our packers. We have quarantine rules, so because mostly it was, fed cattle, not fat cattle coming across the border. And so
Mhm.
we have quarantine rules. So how are those going to apply? Like we have all of these rules for the cattle we used to be getting. Now,
Mhm.
sure, we brought some fat cattle over, but not in what the rumors have is gonna be the new if they open the border.
Mhm.
And also, how come we've been so concerned about this screwworm and all of a sudden we're just not concerned? And so I think some of those have bigger factors to play, but always the thing that I keep going back to is the fundamentals of the cow market have not changed. And I know some people, I contracted my yearlings early in June. I did not think we were going to see the rally we did. So I sold them before I sold any of my customers calves, to be honest. And speaking of that, I have a lot of feedlots who have not purchased calves yet. They are still waiting. They could not decide what to do.
Mhm.
So, right or wrong, there's still demand for calves out there, and we're probably going to run into a shortage of calves because I think a lot of people are going to dump their calves this week,
Mhm.
panicking. Like, I got to get rid of them. But when we saw this rally, I had a lot of people come and say, well, I shouldn't have contracted my calves. I messed up. Well, sure. But historically and this year, if you would have contracted the end of July, beginning of August,
Mhm.
and you did that every year for 10 years, you would be fine. When we try to chase the market and when we try to make decisions off a speculation market,
Mhm.
that is where we get in trouble. Also, I know I talk a lot about cull cows and timing and pricing of cull cows.
Mhm.
There has been a sale in the last 2 weeks that they sold cull cows till 4 a.m.
Mhm.
If you have to wait in line to drop your cull cows off for 2 or 3 hours, you should turn around and go home.
Yeah.
Like, nothing good can happen by selling cull cows in National Shipping Week at 4 a.m. in the morning. And it's so interesting because we know that, but we have this speculation happening to the board, which is making us react in a way. And I think it's going to settle out. I don't think we're just going to go back to dollar calves. Like, I don't think it's going to fall out of bed consistently because we don't have enough beef.
Yeah.
But we have to stop allowing this fear to really drive and make the decisions for us. And I think it's such a good reminder that we have such a disconnect between the ranchers and consumers,
Mhm.
and that story there has to be told
Mhm.
continuously. Um, and sure, the labeling conversation is going to come up a lot. It's going to come up even more now that everyone knows we might get beef from Argentina.
Mhm.
Sure, that's great. Let's get a cool on the table. Let's not make it a government program.
Yeah.
Let's find someone else to come step up and say, I'm going to label the meat, I'm going to do the tracking, and I'm going to put just like a certified Angus beef label on it. Let's put a country of origin labeling on it. But we see what happens when that government gets involved. And right now we're in a government shutdown. So I don't know how you would start a new government program
Mhm.
when there's no workers who are being paid. So that's a disaster. But if we want to label the beef, someone take a step out and do it. I
Mhm.
think it could be a great business model. It's not an easy feat, but it could be a great business model. But the speculation and the speculators speculators are what's driving this market right now.
Mhm.
But I do think the Mexican border is what we need to pay attention to.
I think it's interesting to see just how large the disconnect is because not people don't know the life cycle of the beef industry and what actually affects the product at the grocery store and that price and how far removed it actually is from the live cattle that are being purchased on what you can see on like the boards and stuff. Like those ones are not immediately going to be processed. So bringing in a beef product, not live animals, is not necessarily like helping, especially if we are going the route that they're saying of the cuts that aren't even going into a grocery store. So that was an interesting thing, which is speculation. So we don't know if that's actually what was talked about. Again, we're not in the room, but that is what the rumor on the street was. That they're bringing in things that aren't even going to hit a grocery store shelf. They're just going to go to distributors, which is a completely different game than like what me and you are going to the grocery store to buy.
Right. And already consumers eating out of a distribution truck are a
Mhm.
different level than a mom going to Walmart to buy a pound of ground beef. And it's so interesting because they think ground beef's high now. They have no idea what's coming
Yeah,
in the grocery store because the calves we're selling now are significantly higher.
for the ones they're eating.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think we're going to see ground beef get, what do they say? National average has to be in the $6.
Yeah,
I'd be surprised if we don't get $8 or $9,
yeah.
after. the market.
And what's so interesting is the percentage of change in the beef prices compared to other grocery store items is actually significantly less. It's just the one that is the most noticeable because you have to eat a protein. And so people notice when those costs of those items that you have to buy. You don't have to buy the processed things. People enjoy buying them, but you do have to have a protein source on your plate. And when those prices start to go up, people start to gripe about those ones.
Yeah, and ground beef is still such a great, nutrient dense food.
Mhm,
And per pound, compared to a lot of the other options, it makes so much sense.
mhm,
But it is striking because you're not buying a pound of chips at a time, you know? And so it'll be interesting to see how retailers get creative. Are we going to start to sell like a half pound of hamburger? Are we going to start to sell like one serving, things like that versus traditional 1 pound packages
yeah,
to try to lessen, some of that impact and just change the mindset of consumers because it is still a smart decision and it is relatively affordable still.
mhm,
Um, but I just kept saying, like, at some point, these kettle rice prices are going to make beef be unobtainable for the consumer. It's interesting that we think that's $6
mhm,
because I was thinking that was gonna happen at $10.
yeah,
And so I do think that it is always important that we have to be cautious of what consumers are thinking, what they can afford, and it just is kind of like a really messy situation right now, right, with the government
mhm,
shutdown. Military's not getting paid, government employees aren't getting paid, SNAP benefits are supposedly not gonna be in effect on the 1st of November. So, like,
mhm,
food's a really hot topic right now, and I don't think that necessarily helps the beef industry,
mhm,
because it is someone that can easily take blame, like, "Your product's too expensive," especially when we compare it to a pound of ground turkey or a pound of, even sausage or, chicken, any of those. When you look at lamb, I think it's probably pretty comparable price-wise, but I think when you look at those,
mhm.
ground beef does look expensive.
I also think it'd be interesting if we could, actually poll the consumers because I wonder what the gripe if it was beef-centric prior to the call out from the White House, and also we're in an echo chamber, so I wonder what the average consumer in the middle of New York City have they even heard about beef right now? Like,
Yeah.
do they even know that the beef industry is in shambles? Like, I think we get in these cycles of ourselves because on social media, you see what your algorithm shows you, and we tend to see people that look like us and think like us. So we have been in this echo chamber of calling out imports and stuff, but I wonder what our average actual consumer is seeing.
Well, we don't really see them slowing down buying beef in our store,
Mhm.
and our ground beef's 10.99 a pound. We get very little pushback.
Yeah.
When we first opened, we got some pushback, but that was 3 years ago, and the ground beef was $7, I think, then. But we get very little pushback now, so I know that there is a segment of the population that understands the value of it and is making that purchase. But yes, I wanna know who Trump heard from that beef prices in the grocery store were too expensive.
Yeah. Well, we'll never be in the room, so a question we can't answer. To wrap it up today, we have talked about food sources, but we also got into the conversation about the cow market today. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I think you have to go back to the basics. I
Mhm,
think there's lots of opportunity. I think even with the market dropping, you're still going to sell calves higher than you've ever sold them before, and that's a win.
mhm,
You can't look back. You can't wish you would have sold the first week in October. Like, you have to do what works for your family, follow the plan, sell when you're going to. I think if there's conversations about that border opening up, I would get some positions on the board if you own some cattle. I do think that changes the fundamentals
mhm.
a lot more than what the president tweets. And also, if it's better for your sanity, you don't have to read his tweets.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me jump back on the podcast. I'm excited to continue doing it with you each week.
Thanks for being here.